Hello everyone, it's a new week and a new pizza video. So today we're going to be going over a super simple recipe for beginner pizza makers. We're going to be making a classic Margherita pizza. This is a recipe from the pizzaiolo Vito Iacopelli. I changed a couple of things because I'm always looking to experiment with my pizza recipes and try new things. But the baseline is from him, so I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've most likely seen one of his, and if you haven't though, go check him out. He is the best pizza channel on YouTube. So what we've got going on here is I'm mixing up the Poolish, which, whether this is your first pizza or your 10,000th pizza, I, no matter what, recommend doing some kind of pre-fermentation, which is what this is. This doesn't make creating the pizza any more challenging. I actually think it kind of makes it a little easier. The only thing is it requires a little more time. So we mix together our water, flour, honey, and yeast. We're just gonna stir it up here. I used semolina, which is a thicker flour, but I was experimenting, so feel free to use an all-purpose flour, whatever you have on hand, that should be just fine. Now you're gonna leave your Poolish out for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours at room temp, and then you're gonna actually just store it overnight in the fridge, and it should have doubled in size in about 18 to 24 hours. It should be ready to use. When I opened mine up, I was actually kind of worried because I didn't see as much expansion as I thought I was going to, but I did see some air bubbles in there and it seemed like the fermentation did take hold, so I figured it was going to work. So I added my Poolish to 500 grams of all-purpose flour, and I'm slowly going to pour in 300 milliliters of water with 20 grams of salt dissolved in there. And we're just going to start mixing away. The goal here is to make a sticky dough with no excess flour left at all in the bowl anywhere. If you've never done this before or you haven't done it that many times, you're gonna notice that the dough is really sticky, and that's what you want. So your first instinct is probably gonna be to just add more flour. You might think you've done something wrong, the dough just won't get off your hands, but you do not want to add flour here because that's actually gonna ruin the hydration levels. So what you're probably gonna need to do is just keep working it. The first couple times I made dough, I found this step to be a little frustrating, but it's because I didn't understand that this is the part that you need to be most patient, is mixing together all these ingredients. Allow yourself the time to really make a smooth dough, incorporate all those ingredients together so there's no chunks of flour left, and the dough is actually just going to start to form on its own. And there we go, so all those ingredients are mixed together pretty well, and I took it out of the bowl and dumped it onto my cutting board here so I can start to roll it out and knead it. Another thing to keep in mind here is you want to move really quick. Do not give the dough time to catch up with you. You want to just keep rolling and pressing and slamming that dough against whatever surface you have here, and just keep working it really quick so it doesn't have time to stick to your fingers, and it's slowly going to start to smoothen out and get more comfortable. Now this is probably the best part of the experience, one of the best parts at least, is really stretching this dough out. So this is another point too where you don't want to add more flour. If you can't get that dough to let go of your hands and become a little less sticky, start to quicken your process up. Go faster and faster, and then you should be getting to a point where that dough's starting to smooth out and let go of you a little easier. You should start to be getting to a point where you can pick up the dough and open it out and fold it into itself. And you just keep kind of twisting and spinning, and it's slowly going to become more smooth. It'll still stick to you, but it's going to get a lot easier from here. So you're going to see that the dough ball is starting to form, and we're about ready to let it sit and rest. So I'm just going to cover it with some olive oil, and we're going to let it sit here for 15 minutes like this in the open air. Okay, so your dough should have grown a little bit by now, and it's time to separate it from the board. So I'm going to take my spatula and just kind of spin it around underneath this, spin it around like that, so we can separate it, and this is also going to start to smoothen it out as well. So once that dough is separated, you can add a little bit of olive oil to your hands and to the top of the dough. and it's time to really finish off its forming process. So you can just start to grab it and fold it into itself underneath. It's going to start to look like a ball of mozzarella cheese. That's exactly what you want. You can start to spin it around, keep it separated from the board and smoothen it out, and pull and drag on the bottom until you start to notice that there's no more lumps or bumps and the dough is a smooth ball. So now we're going to cover our dough ball with a moist towel or paper towels, whatever you have laying around, and we're going to let it sit for an hour so it can probably double in size. After an hour, you can remove your towel and it's time to divide the dough ball into the 4 dough balls that this recipe is designed for. You can rub some olive oil on your hands and on your spatula so you don't stick to the dough, and you just slice this ball right down the middle. Then you can separate the two, and whatever side you're working with first, you can kind of stretch out a little bit, and we're going to cut that in half as well and start to roll it into itself and form the dough ball. Keep whatever's on top and grab it and slowly start to fold it in. You can tuck it in there and start to make a ball. I had to add a little more olive oil to my hands because it was kind of sticky dough. And you just tuck it in like this and slowly squeeze it in. You're gonna see there's air there, and there's gonna be some air bubbles probably start to form. But it should still be smooth. It should look like that little ball of mozzarella. And you can tuck all that excess dough in there underneath, or you could twist it and pull that piece off. This process is going to be the same with all 4 dough balls, so you just get them formed and then you can put them into a container of some kind because they're going to have to sit out for an hour at room temperature before you put them in the fridge or before you cook them. Put just a little bit of olive oil on whatever container you're using, just so they don't get stuck when you try to pull them out when it's time to cook. Okay, and it's finally time to make our pizza. So you're gonna sprinkle some flour on whatever surface you're gonna be using to make it, and you're just gonna lay that dough in the flour, and you're gonna coat both sides. So you're gonna kind of press it in there, and then flip it over, and press it in on that other side, and then be sure to remove that excess flour to the side, just so that you don't have it too coated, because we don't wanna have any burnt flour coating our pizza when it's time to put it in the oven. Here you can just press out those edges to make sure you keep that fluffy crust right before we sweep away that flour. Now we can expand the pizza a little bit by pressing on the center and pulling out on those edges. Be careful here, depending on how your dough turned out, there is a possibility you could kind of tear it in the middle. You don't want it to be too thin in the center there, so you don't create any rips. If you do create a rip though, I've found you can put a little bit of water on your fingers and pinch that dough together to rehydrate it and patch it up. If you have your pizza peel, you can slide your dough on there and give it one last little stretch before you add your sauce and put it in the oven. If you don't have a pizza peel and you're not cooking it on a stone or a pan in the oven, you're just gonna cook it straight on the pan, just put your dough on there and you can form it out around that pan and then add your sauce the same way and put it in the oven, because we're just gonna blind bake it before we add all our other toppings. Since I'm working with a pizza stone, I've had my oven going for an hour. That pizza stone has been heating up in there at 500 degrees, so it's nice and toasty. That is the optimal temperature you want to cook your pizzas at, but whatever the highest temperature your oven can go to, you should just use that. It's been about 5 minutes, we pulled the pizza out, and it's time to add some toppings. Of course, we have to start with some Parmigiano Reggiano, get that sprinkled on there, and then I'm just gonna baste outside of that crust with some olive oil so it doesn't get too burnt, and of course we gotta add our mozzarella here. And then we're gonna toss it back in the oven so it can finish off baking. Everybody's cook time is going to vary here, so you just have to keep an eye on your pizza while it's in the oven, and you can give it a turn every now and then with a spatula, or as you saw earlier, I was using some tongs, and that should do just fine. And here it is, it looks like our pizza is done, and we just gotta finish off topping it. with basil, of course, because we're making a margherita pizza, some more Parmigiano Reggiano, and of course you can dribble on some olive oil too to top it off. And this is our super easy to make margherita pizza. It's really not that crazy. It's such a good beginner pizza to start with. So we're gonna cut right into it. We're gonna see how it turned out. The outside crust looks nice and golden and fluffy still. It's nice and paper thin, so it's really thin on the center, but pops up on those edges for a beautiful crust. This pizza is nice and light. You could probably eat the whole thing in one sitting, or maybe at least 3 slices, and you're gonna feel good. You're not gonna feel guilty about eating this pizza. It's got some nice bubbles on that crust there, but it's still a thin center. I'm super happy with how this pizza turned out. You should give it a try and let me know what you think. I'll see you next week with a whole new pizza.